To Leading in the 21st Century. This session is going to focus on, and I hope you enjoy it, um, leadership for organizational health. And although we sometimes don't want to dip too deeply into the world of psychology, because we are not psychologists, although everybody, I think, on the planet that I've run into plays that role from time to time, we do want to talk about organizational health as an interest because it is a multiplier for success. In fact, the literature is very clear. When people feel engaged, connected, they love their work, they enjoy what they're doing, they see purpose in it, etc., that their morale goes up. And when morale is high and the organization feels healthy, using a psychological term, it produces higher quality results. So there's just no question that the research says that's so. So as we designed this particular opening seminar, Leadership in the 21st Century, we thought that some chat about what that could look like in a very practical way would be useful. So that's our intention, so that when we finish this, as you finally design your operating principles and what you stand for, your values as a leader, that this could be, if you choose it to be, a part of your set of operating principles. So with that said, Colleen and Deb, I ask you both, what did you hear me saying? What does this mean to you moving forward? Colleen, would you start?
Sure, absolutely, Ray. What I heard was engagement, talking about employee engagement and how that absolutely contributes to organizational health. And the more engaged people are, or the less engaged they are, contributes to organizational health, and in turn impacts the results that you achieve. So really just kind of linking those three together, and as we go through the journey, kind of thinking about how this pertains to me and my situation.
Well said. I actually think at some level this should be a leadership strategy that we need to be thinking about as leaders. How do we enable organizational health inside the system, the team, the group we work with, even our peers? You know, what are the ways we can kind of keep this alive moving forward? Thank you so much. Deb, what are you thinking?
Again, very similar to Colleen. I actually was drawing some notes as you were speaking, Ray, about, you know, health, and then a circle to increased morale produces higher quality results. And, you know, it's a lot like the quality of the relationship, and conversation is the relationship. So the better conversations, the better your relationship. So I hear you saying that this is a cycle, which I'm assuming, like most cycles, it can gain momentum. You know, I happen to work on a lot of teams, and they do need to produce results. And when they are producing, they become happier. And then as they become happier, they're producing more. So I didn't dive too deeply into it, but I can clearly see what you're saying work on a day-to-day basis. On the other hand, I'm thinking to myself, I also know of some very unhealthy organizations that are, you know, not producing what they want in terms of results, and that seems to be a vicious cycle. So I can't wait to hear more.
I think that is a vicious cycle. And when we hit the next section in our web series on using intentional, disciplined conversation as part of our standard leadership day-to-day work, it actually produces organizational health, and this section is going to explain why. So that's really great. Thank you, Deb. Great comments. Well, let's continue and do what we've done each time and ask each of you to weigh in on what are one or two of your big learnings from the last time when we worked on personal responsibilities of leadership. And that session, I think, was a lot of fun, and the stories that you guys provided, I think, just made the session even more useful in terms of creating PPK, personal practical knowledge. So Deb, let's start with you. What's one or two of your takeaways from last session?
Well, I loved all three of, I'll call them the exercises that we did last time, the 9 dots and the look on, look out, and the scotomas. I think just because of where I am right now, I was focused maybe in the scotoma piece, or the blind spots resonated more with me. Just that it is so easy to just see what you were looking for and not then see things that you were not necessarily looking for. And yet some of those things that you're not looking for or looking at might be fantastic, either missed opportunities or something that does need your attention. So I've been thinking a lot about that, and I'm sure we'll be talking a little bit more about that in the future, but would love to know more around how do I increase my observational skills around being able to see what I'm not seeing.
Oh, Deb, that's a wonderful, wonderful collection of sentences around scotoma. As I prepared for that particular web series, when we worked on that, I went back into the literature on reticular activating systems, which is where, that's kind of where scotomas live. And I took the visual exercises that anyone can find online. And so when I look at something, and right now I'm looking out my window at some trees, I see a tree and a branch and leaves on the tree, and don't even realize that I have blind spots right now. In order for me to see the tree, my cognition stops me from seeing things that might distract me from looking at that tree. Just like your gorilla story, and if you folks are weighing in now and didn't hear the gorilla story, go back to session 3 and listen to Deb's gorilla story. It was superior, but it is so true. The rods and cones that are in our eyes stop us as we look at something from seeing the entire landscape. Otherwise, it would make us crazy. We actually block things out so that we actually can focus on certain things. So, Deb, that was great. Colleen, what was one of your takeaways?
Really just building upon what Deb tapped into, kind of really that sense of awareness on how can I broaden my personal perspective. So I ensure that I'm seeing multiple different points of view, getting as much data as I can. And I think I really reflected upon those stories after that session. And the thing that resonated with me was, how many times when you're certain, right, and I've locked on to the answer, now the only thing I see is evidence to support my position, which in turn then I dig further in because I'm right. Right?
That's right. That's right. I'm right. All right.
So I just thought about that and how many times, unfortunately, we can unknowingly slide into knowing the answer and only seeing the evidence to support our position and the dangers of that.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Where I live around the scotoma piece is a sentence that my teacher, when I first learned about scotomas, used, and I'll use it here, and I give credit to Louis Tice for this. He said the problem with scotomas isn't that we have them. We all have scotomas. The problem with scotomas is that so many people don't really know they have them. In fact, once you learn about them, you start to think, well, now that I know about scotomas, I don't have one about this. When the truth is, yeah, you do. We all do. In any situation, we filter information to make what we think is so more correct. The idea of being a responsibility of leadership is to constantly expand your view. Expand your view. Look for alternate perspectives and positions. And all of you that are listening will find out in the next web series on intentional conversations. We will show methods, actual ways to pull out of a team how they see things differently. That helps us with our scotomas, and it also helps our team members. So this particular piece, I think, and thank you for your learnings, ladies. They were elegant, and I think certainly on point. Any final thoughts before we move forward into this last session?
No, Ray, not for me. Thanks.
And not for me either.
Good deal. Well, in order for this next session to kind of have some context, this next section is going to really talk about motivation in a subtle way. And it's going to talk about motivation, as Deb has already alluded to, and Colleen, in the context of if I really aspire to something, I want something, and I see that I'm starting to accomplish it, my aspiration grows. The other motivation that's out there is fear, just like our little girl who learned to ride the bike. And she did learn to ride the bike. Not a problem. The problem happens when, wow, that was a great result. You learned to ride your bike. Let's go play catch, or learn to play football, or learn to play a musical instrument. The chance of that young lady shifting from fear to aspiration is certainly tenuous at best, and she may never able to really shift into that learning mode without some direct intervention. So here, I'm going to just say there are two forces that tend to motivate people, everywhere. fear and aspiration. And of course, we are inviting people in this world of co-creating the future to be aspirational in the way they think about creating some kind of motivation. Colleen, what are you thinking about fear and aspiration here?
I guess I got a vision of a carrot and a stick, kind of, and
Yeah.
just thinking once I was thinking about the fear, how that works. That's kind of a push, and then if we truly want to aspire, it's more of the pulling out greatness or pulling out what are people trying to achieve. So I think I went back to that space of inquiry versus advocacy. That kind of resonated that way.
That's excellent. Helping people really identify what would their future look like if they got what they want, even if it's somebody in a sales environment or a teaching environment or a hospital, all these places that we've all worked, or in government. What is it you really want, and how do we aspire to that? And the funny thing about this in my practice, when I ask people what they want, they have a tendency to tell me what they don't want. And that's because a lot of the early conditioning that we go through is about fear. Don't do this or something bad will happen. And it's this creation of that and in a very loving way, I think people do that. I don't think they do it because they're Machiavellian or negative or bad. It's just how we have a tendency to keep people safe when they're very, very young and can't see the whole landscape. They have scotomas. So we actually are very directive and, don't do this or something bad will happen. Eventually, that becomes the modus operandi for motivation, unless an intervention occurs. And in a sense, this is kind of an intervention. For me, certainly, I think about this all the time. How do I aspire rather than go to something because I'm afraid of it? So thank you so much, Colleen. Deb, what are you thinking?
Again, building a little bit on both you and Colleen, I would say, when I look at it for me personally, I notice when I'm in fear, and I am there sometimes, that I feel, like very small, helpless. It takes me away my energy. And I also notice that a lot of fear, it's just in my head. It's my self-talk. It's what if this doesn't happen. And yet when I feel inspired or, in aspiration, I feel like joyful, big, energetic, on, and hopeful. So, I wonder that, yes, while others can either help us with inspiration or put us in a place of fear, I'm just wondering how often we just put ourselves in that place. And what is it? I think of Mark Twain, and I'll get the quote wrong, but it's something like, I've lived through many horrific things in my lifetime, and some of them actually happened. So I think it's something similar to, but I wonder how much we talk ourselves into a fear situation. We get it from external, but I believe we create a lot of it ourselves internally.
That is a great quote, and it's funny you bring the Mark Twain quote up, and I'll tell you why it's amusing to me. I've never told either one of you about this. When I was in my early teens, I was playing violin in a high school orchestra. And we had two leaders. One was the first violin, which the first violin is always the leader of the string section and actually would take over for the orchestra leader. I don't know, many people don't even know that. If the orchestra leader is not available, sick, not on, whatever happens, the first violinist is the substitute. Number two is the orchestra leader. And the first violinist was a kid, one of us. He was a couple years older than me, maybe 3, but he motivated us through fear. And he used to say, you don't want to play wrong notes because you'll be out of tune, we're going to look stupid, and just created this litany of things that could happen. I am sure that the orchestra leader said these words to me, but I didn't hear them until senior year. He said, you need to be able to play your big violin when we're in concert. And I didn't understand what that meant until my senior year, when he said, if you really aspire to adding value to this orchestra and playing the notes on that violin that are going to make this next piece magnificent, what would that sound like? What would that feel like? What would that look like? He shifted me from this place of I don't want to play any wrong notes to play the big violin. And for me, that was the first time I actually felt that distinction between avoiding playing incorrect notes and aspiring to playing this instrument in such a huge way that it actually was bigger than me. And that, I'm sure both of you have had experiences like that in your life, but that for me was the beginning of this journey about what motivates me to move forward, to learn. Certainly I learned out of fear, but I sure was never going to play that big violin if I just stayed there. How's that land on you, ladies? Deb, why don't you start?
Well, I know we've said this thousands of times to each other and to groups, that whole point of what you focus on grows. And even though fear and motivation or aspiring, we might talk about the same result, such as a great concert or something.
Yeah.
But the way we talk about it is, one, by avoiding playing, by avoiding any mistakes, and the other is just by, just being in the moment and letting that music come through you, etc. It's interesting in the way we present the how, it changes the whole picture, and it changes it from one of fear versus, aspiring. So that's just what I'm thinking about. It's the result. We still wanted the same result, but the way we describe it and the way we motivate people to get there, or inspire people to get there, I should say, it really changes the landscape. And now you're in a defensive mode, and again, you're small and fearful versus being big and bold and taking risk.
Yeah, I think you hit this beautifully. And talking about our last session, in the fear environment, we have a tendency to stay inside of our 9 dots even more strongly. I don't want to get out of here. In fact, I'm staying right here. I'm going to play the right notes. In fact, I'll actually skip a couple of bars if I have to, so I don't play wrong notes. And if there's a particularly challenging session, I might just not play it at all. So there's that incredible distinction about fear creating our 9 dots and keeping us inside those 9 dots, not letting us out. Aspiration kind of opens the door for us to draw the line beyond the dot that defined that little box that we were living in. That was really cool, Deb. Thank you so much. Colleen, anything to add on this piece?
Yeah, just one thing that was really surfacing with me was leadership language, and how as leaders, the power of the words you choose can create an environment of fear where it's very limiting in the thinking, versus you can use language that is expansive, very aspirational, and creates an environment for limitless thinking.
Oh, that is really so. Okay, immediately, Colleen, I thought about the Little League World Series, which I watched this year because I was so interested in the coach. So they're losing, like, I don't know, 7-0, 8-0, and it's late in the game, and he changes pitchers and he goes out there and he says to the infielders that came into the mound to talk to him while he puts a new pitcher in, he says, "Are you guys having any fun?" And they didn't know what to say to him. He said, "Oh, I'm serious. Are you having any fun?" And all of a sudden they started to giggle, and he said, "The fundamental reason we do this is it's called we play baseball, and we're supposed to be having fun." So he hands the new pitcher the ball, and he says to him, "Okay, we're getting shelled. We're getting killed. I hope you can do something about this." And he starts to laugh, the new kid that's coming in. So he shifted the entire conversation with some elegant humor to, okay, and then he said to him, let's just really have fun out here, and all I want you to do is throw your best pitches for strikes. That's all you got to do. Oh my God, what a coach, right? I mean, that's the kind of person I want hanging out with my children when they were little, and certainly my grandchildren today. That's just fear. Because he could have said 1,000 other things. He could have scolded them. He could have, you guys got to fix this. Stop blowing these out. Get a strike over, for God's sakes. What's wrong? Any kind of other language, leadership language, would have induced fear as opposed to aspiration. He used humor, but it certainly created the aspirational set for that. I think that's really great. Thank you, folks. Let's move on. What is organizational health? And I would say to leaders, organizational health is a strategy. It is something I choose to do to make sure that this team that I lead, this group that I lead, my peers, all of us, actually behave in ways that produce high quality results, because we enjoy being together, we enjoy working together, and we know that what we do really matters. Now, I'll come to those 3 edges in a minute, but I would like to make the case here that it's actually a strategy. One that sometimes gets ignored. where people say, well, it just doesn't match, not my deal. That's just not my deal. I got to get these results. And my invitation is to say, no, it is your deal. And to invite leaders to say, it really does matter, how and why we create this particular set of strategies around organizational health. Because it increases results and people just feel better about coming to work on a regular basis. So with that said, I invite all of you right now to take a minute and just write down, when you've been on a team that was really working well, how did you determine that it was organizationally healthy? What did people do to make sure that that team stayed healthy in terms of its responsiveness to each other and its aspirational nature of moving towards a goal? What was going on in that particular piece? Take a good couple, 3 minutes to write about this, of course, as long or as little as you like, because you're pressing pause and you can come back to us a minute. So feel free to do a little bit of writing, and I'll come back to you in just a few seconds. Enjoy your writing time. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. So let me kind of come into this next piece and just talk about the 3 conditions that the literature has presented seem to be in place. And for each of these, I'd like you to be thinking about, how can I keep this alive for me? If the first person I lead is me, how do I keep these conditions alive? So here is the first of the 3, self-reference. This is actually a little bit of an academic or research-based term. But what it really means is that I know how I fit in to this particular team and how my work helps the team achieve and how it helps the enterprise achieve. It's almost like bonding somebody together to the work and the vision and the picture of success that the organization or enterprise has. So the first condition is self-reference. And I'm going to have Colleen and Deb respond to this a little bit and talk about when they have felt really connected to something, what was the outcome? And if they'd like to give me a non-example, that would be great too. So give me an example of when you said, boy, I really felt connected to this. So my self-reference, or how I fit in, really was clear. Colleen, do you want to start?
Sure. I can think back. I actually was a department director at a community college, right? And I wrote a grant, and one of the things was, to fund the grant, you had to, there were certain requirements, and one of the requirements was you had to achieve a certain level of testing. We've all heard this before, right? And we would be funded based upon our results of this testing. And I went to the group, surfaced their best thinking. How is it when we work with, these are adult learners that we were working with, our group of adult learners, how is it that we could best, that we could get the best results that we possibly could? I did my very best to tap into the group's best thinking. The teachers then actually chatted with the students as well. We got everyone on board. Everyone could see the vision of what we were trying to accomplish. And then we went ahead and put together a plan. I really feel like that I felt extremely connected to it. I felt the teachers felt connected, as well as the students. They understood the vision of what we were trying to accomplish. And I have to tell you, I'm very, very proud of the results. I had people calling me. This was a federal grant, and they were asking me, oh my goodness, Colleen, how can you get those unbelievable results with such a small school up north in Northern California? How are you hitting it out of the ballpark? And I was actually invited multiple different places across the country to speak about the results I was achieving. So I started with this goal, and part of it was a compliance piece, but I really tried to craft an environment where everyone felt connected to the vision. They could see themselves, how they could contribute to getting success. And as I said, at the end of the day, we were scoring some of the highest marks across the country.
I want to really hit on something you said, that it was a fascinating story, and congratulations. And in it, you said, I didn't craft the plan until we could figure out how we all fit in and how we were going to do this and how each of our efforts would contribute to the vision. So I had a vision, and then I went and said to people, tell me how you would fit into this. Then you crafted the plan That was magnificent. And I think sometimes we have a tendency to start to create the plan right away rather than take the time to say, this is where we're going, and this is how we all fit into this picture of where we're going. And I know, Deb, you've had direct experience with this recently, and it's very challenging when people don't quite know how they fit in. Thank you, Colleen. That was great. Deb, how about you?
Well, I'll describe a time that, as you know, I came from a large corporation, and I was asked one particular year to lead, I'll say an experimental project. We had a hypothesis. We thought something would work, and then it was my charge to just see if it would work. And I wanted to be cautious also to not make it work just in the results, but to truly see if this would be a sustainable system that we could put into our organization. So actually, similar to Colleen, we had the theory or the hypothesis, and I just began to get people's best thinking around the country. In fact, I formed a team that later grew to 400 people giving not only their input, but they were actually working the program. They were the ones doing the work. And I remember now, thinking back, this has been a few years ago, but the continual chain of conversations that they had with each other, they had with me, and we set up kind of a system to keep this ongoing conversation of what's going well, what would you like to do differently, to your point, Ray, how do you see things differently? And so we then built the program really around these 400 experiences. So again, the reason I loved being on that team is I just felt like I was constantly learning, and I felt like we were not only successful in touching people's lives and really changing part of our organization, and I think enhancing part of our organization, but they were doing just great work, meaning noble work for customers, et cetera. So it was just a win-win-win, and there was just a ton of energy and excitement, and it sustained right on through, and that program's still alive today and being continually enhanced.
I think what you did there was absolutely magnificent, and you enable people to figure out for themselves how they fit into the results that we were trying to, or you were trying to accomplish. Beautifully stated. This sense of self-reference is one of the conditions for organizational health. I don't think we spend enough time creating a context where people say, hey, this is why this matters and how you fit into this. Once that starts to unfold, people feel energized to accomplish things. Thank you very much. Those of you at home, take a minute and think about a time when you were on a team in a situation where you actually felt like you really fit in, you knew what your role was and how you contributed to the success of that team. Enjoy your writing time. Be back to you in a moment. Welcome back, everybody. Self-reference, how I fit in. That is the first condition that seems to be ubiquitous, among teams that are really functioning at a high level, producing results, and feel good about what it is they're trying to accomplish. The second one, which I love, and we're going to use one of Brian Zakowski's cartoons to help us remember this one. These kinds of stimulations really make life fun for us. We can remember things much more easily. So information and common understanding. And this cartoon hits it beautifully. And I'm going to read it because sometimes it's hard to see what's up there in print. But in the first frame, the young lady is saying to the gentleman, enough about me. What do you do for a living? And you can see what he looks like. He's kind of got tattoos, kind of a rough-looking guy, right? And they're obviously in a bar having a drink together somewhere. They both have a drink in hand. So in the second frame, the gentleman she's chatting up says, oh, I'm a hitman. And then she says, really? I'd love to hear one of them sometime. So she didn't really understand what hitman meant. She had a scotoma about what it meant to be a hitman. This is so part of our conversation in organizational health because we've already hit this. Our pilots who really did not have, they did their checklist, but they didn't have any meaning about where they really were in flight and who was in front of them. This particular cartoon and 1,000 other examples. If you give somebody information and fail to take the time to develop an understanding, in other words, what does the information mean to me, the person would never know how they fit in, they would have no self-reference, and they might make a meaning out of this that they didn't quite, or was not expected. And certainly in this case, no one expected that one. And then finally, Now, this one we've hit dramatically about relationships, and we've already said the conversation is the relationship. So even though she doesn't have common understanding, at some level she's building a relationship with this gentleman. And she's trying to figure out how she fits into this whole thing. I invite you to consider people are constantly trying to figure their self-reference out, how I fit in. They're constantly trying to make meaning out of information that's unfolding. And relationships, when high quality relationships exist inside of a system, we have a place that has true organizational health. Morale's high, people are feeling good, results are unfolding. And as you know, we said at the outset, organizational health is not a condition we like to have. It probably is one of the most important leadership strategies to be developed. Information, relationships, and self-reference, critical for us to unfold going forward. So I'll start with you, Deb, this time. What are you thinking about these three?
Well, gosh, Ray, again, my mind sometimes just gets ahead of me. I am thinking about this, particularly maybe the piece around the clarity of how we fit in, how does our work fit in, and how do we fit in with the other components of the team. And it's sometimes in my experiences, I find that people who are, I'm going to say, actually doing the work, which are normally not the upper ranks of an organization. I mean, they're the physical, right. I'm meeting with the customer, I'm doing the work. We mentioned it on the last session, session 3. Many times they receive the least amount of information. And you referenced it last time and did a very good job of it. We might talk about years around a strategy at a very high level, but as you go down the chain of command, a lot of times the people who actually have to implement whatever it might be has the least amount of information. So I guess I'm just kind of caught on, the constant discussion and conversation, particularly with that level of individual, so that they can not only know where they are this minute, but because things change constantly, having that continuous conversation and always checking in of how they see themselves fitting in with their peers and partners, coworkers, and then how does their work fit in. So just some thoughts around that.
Oh, it goes back to that whole conversation we had offline about context. If somebody doesn't understand the context of the situation and how they fit in, and unfortunately, you have all seen this, I've seen this, if they don't know how they fit in, they don't understand contextually how they fit in, they will begin to find meaning in different ways. Mm-hmm. They'll start to become the boo birds or the negative naysayers, or they'll start to do something else because they're going to make meaning in another way. And that actually disenfranchises them from the system and causes them to try and find organizational health elsewhere, because they're going to find a place where they have relationships, where they have information with common understanding, and when they have self-reference. And sometimes that becomes a splinter group that actually hurts the health of the organization. So when I said before this is actually a leadership strategy, it is absolutely one. And Deb, you hit that on the head. Colleen, where are you on these three?
I was just thinking about, as you mentioned, that we're all meaning makers. And I'm going to be sitting here creating without a context, right, and without specific focus and without a common understanding about the information and about how I fit in, I'm going to sit over here and make meaning all day long. And because of my perspective and my scotomas, my meaning can be completely different than Deb. And if I am not feeling comfortable and I do not feel like the space is safe because my relationship perhaps with Deb or with someone else isn't strong, then I'm going to continue making my own meaning and doing what I think perhaps is best. And who knows, I might not be getting the results you want because I don't feel comfortable enough to come back to Deb and say, geez, Deb, I'm not quite sure if I understood you. If that space, because of her leadership language, not that you'd ever do this, Deb, was locked on to being right, and I did not feel safe, I would not be able to make the meaning that she is intending me to make. Therefore, my actions will not reflect that common understanding, and nor were the results. So I just love how all of this really falls back onto each other.
I mean, Colleen, that's fantastic. The idea that we actually we use this as a strategy to make sure that in every interaction we have the opportunity to develop a relationship through elegant conversation. We have the opportunity to remind people about how their work actually enables the system to be successful, and that we recognize that common understanding is our output. We've got to generate common understanding. Otherwise, people will, to your point, Colleen, they will make meaning out of something and then run down that road. And if they find out after a while they've been running down a road no one expected them to run down, they become very demoralized. And the system starts to feel the effect of a group of people or an individual who doesn't feel like they fit in anymore. Their morale about accomplishing systems results becomes exceedingly negative. That was just well done, well done, well done. Deb, any final comment on this piece?
I think you covered it, but I think the thing that I was leaping to there as well was, rarely does that person who makes their own meaning keep it to themselves. Even though they might not have let's just say a relationship and feel safe space with perhaps their supervisor, they may with a peer or two. So I think when we go back to organizational health, that lack of meaning or misunderstanding can grow so exponentially based on the conversations between the peers. So we wonder how things can get out of control so quickly sometimes. But when you look at I'll just say the mathematics of it, it's very easy to see how if you look at exponential growth and the way people chat, and if I think my peer is bright and capable, and he or she indicates to me that a situation is a certain way, I trust them, and I'm going to believe that too, or I'm going to move forward, and then I'm going to tell that story. So just, again, I guess I think of organizational health and how it can quickly go one way or the other based on context or lack thereof.
Well said. And that's why parking lot meetings are so interesting, because people are out there trying to make meaning. They're really trying to figure out what the heck this means to them. And if they have somebody they trust and care about, and they say, oh, that means that to you, well, I guess that could mean that to me also. And they begin to almost pile on. And so we create a picture of something we really didn't want. But when the relationships are correct, we can actually build that common understanding, because people can begin to question and say, okay, what I'm hearing you say is this, do I have this right? That's such a simple, elegant sentence to make and question to create. At the same time, unless the space is safe, people will withhold that one. That was really great, Deb. Thank you. And
well, let me add, I just want to add one more
please.
thing that I learned from you, Ray, and I felt that this was so incredibly valuable. You might see a group of people, and they will actually verbalize, oh, we were just commiserating.
Yeah.
So particularly someone who's misunderstood the context or, has gotten out of alignment with the organizational health. And I learned from you, to commiserate is to create a community of misery. And as I actually talked about that and used those words, I think it's just a word that we tend to think, oh, that is harmless. The commiserating, they're just being buddies. But when you think of commiserating as creating a community of misery, that gives it a whole new feel and a whole new meaning.
And the reason they like it, they have self-reference. I am now in a community where I fit in, and I am commiserating, creating a community where my unhappiness actually is not just accepted, but celebrated. So this is huge as we start thinking about what is our strategy to make sure that commiseration is not something that's the norm in our system. And actually in some companies and some organizations on the planet, they say these crazy things like, good troops complain. Well, that's the old military metaphor that people in the trenches working or trying to win a war, they do complain. They do. They use more colorful language, but they say it. And what they're doing is they're creating a bond among themselves. But unless they really understand how they fit in terms of moving forward, unless they're shoved around really, really hard, they will get stuck in actually aspiring to accomplish something. Oh, guys, this was really wonderful, 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 wonderful. Any final thoughts before we come to our last two slides?
Not from me. Thanks, Ray.
No, I think you guys covered that extremely well. I enjoyed that.
Thanks, Colleen. So here we are. How can you tell if those that you lead are connected to the system? And I think that's really was the intention of these few slides, was to give those of you that are listening in an opportunity to say, well, how is it that I can do this? Because I think we have a tendency to rely on surveys. So send out a survey to check on the morale. Send out a survey to see if everybody's feeling okay about what's cooking. And those surveys are generally not taken very seriously by the person taking the survey. And then sometimes we rely too much on the metrics that unfold around that. So this particular section in this first webinar series about leading in the 21st century was giving you a simple way to kind of check by simply asking some questions. How are you guys doing? Do you feel connected to the system? How am I doing as leader, making sure that I'm spending time to give enough context so that you see that what you do really matters? How am I doing in my conversational structures? Am I making sure the space is safe so you can talk with me? That I feel like what's going on here really is something that you see as useful, and maintaining those very disciplined, intentional conversations to build those professional relationships so people really feel connected to what's going on in the system. And then finally, you could simply say every time you do a download, stop and make sure that we create common understanding, that people actually see what's going on, not just from their personal meaning perspective, but collectively. What is the intended understanding with this information that's unfolding? And as you know, ladies and gentlemen, we will get into this in our next section on meetings and conversations. However, meetings really have a great opportunity embedded in them to build information with understanding, relationships, and self-reference. So the next sections that we go to are going to be how you can do these three things. Make sure this strategy of maintaining self-reference for people that for yourself and those you lead, making sure that relationships are growing, quality relationships are growing, and that every effort is made to do information with common understanding. We will show how to do this directly in meetings using certain theories, methods, and tools, and personal practical knowledge that will grow these three conditions inside the system on a very regular basis. So ladies and gentlemen, I would invite you over this right now to just take a minute and say what resonated most with you in this session. And I'm going to do the same thing with Colleen and Deb when you come back. So right now, take a couple of minutes and write down what's your biggest learning, what resonated the most, and I love this one, what PPK, what personal practical knowledge are you taking away that you think is usable, that you could use immediately in your next conversation or in your next meeting. We'll be back to you in a couple of seconds. Enjoy your writing time. Colleen and Deb, what's your big takeaway from these three conditions that we actually can design and work toward in order to create and sustain organizational health? Who'd like to start?
I'll go ahead and start, if that's okay, Deb.
Oh, absolutely.
I think for me, it's all three of them. And the piece that you opened up with, Ray, how in the 21st century, it truly is a strategy, organizational health, right? I think Deb and her great story saying, oh, well, they're just commiserating over there. Well, that's okay. I think sometimes we get so busy, once again, with the pace of things, and we might notice kind of different things going on, yet truly, if we're going to embrace this new way of leading, recognizing these things, being aware of them, being aware of these three key elements or conditions that the leader needs to develop for organizational health and to get results, because at the end of the day, that's truly what each leader needs to get, right? They're looking at what are the results you're getting. So I think it's that sense of awareness around, if I'm the leader, how can I take into consideration these conditions for organizational health? How can I manage my time, my meetings, my relationships to ensure that there's information with understanding, that people feel connected, and that the relationships are strong enough so those conversations are happening where I can, respond to them instead of outside in the parking lot. And so I think it's that sense of embracing this in their own personal journey as a strategy.
Colleen, you just actually, I think, made uh, the greatest point for people listening. When people read research about organizations, leadership, doesn't matter. Any research you read about the human equation when we come together, these conditions feel very esoteric. Oh yes, I think self-reference is important. So are relationships. So is information with understanding. What you just did is clearly articulated. This is something you can create. You can actually create self-reference in your work as a leader. You can enhance the quality of relationships by developing these kinds of conversations that lead to really high level professional relationships and then results. And you can use every meeting, every agenda item, every conversation you have to make sure that there's understanding. There is common understanding unfolding when new information is presented to any team, any group in any organization or enterprise. Colleen, I love that. Sometimes these ideas or conditions of organizational health are esoteric and too esoteric in nature for people. So, can I do something about that? And you just really beautifully articulated, yes, you can. You can make sure that each of these three conditions are alive all the time. Thank you so much. Deb, what do you think? And what's your big takeaway from this little piece of our web series?
Well, I'm going to, as usual, I'm going to build on a couple things that Colleen mentioned, and I guess I've just like the session 3, I'm thinking about the mirror and self. And while most of the time we were discussing this today, I was thinking self-reference in terms of my team. But when you said, "What's your big PPK? What's your takeaway?" and that you can use immediately, I think two things popped up. First of all, was I also heard you say, constantly check in with the team. How am I doing on communicating this, etc.? I love that, and I think that's an extremely useful piece where you constantly generate authentic feedback. And I think the second piece I'd add on would be the self-reference. In other words, do I know? Am I sure I know how I fit into the team as the leader or as a do I believe something that is no longer true about my role on the team? So I would do those two things. I'd reflect around self-reference and check in with others to see if I'm still seeing it the way the team and the organization needs me to see my role. And then this constant checking in of, am I doing an okay job? Am I being clear enough, or am I opening safe space for people? So I think I'd immediately take those two pieces and run with them.
Deb, I got to tell you, I was thinking about, before we started this last session, closing comments, and you just made the segue happen beautifully. When we started this web series on leading in the 21st century, there were two pieces that I thought would be useful for any listener, me included, that I could work on. And that would be, what do I stand for? What are my values as a leader? And the way I explain those values is how I say what I stand for. This is what I really believe in as a leader. And one of the operating principles that you just identified, which is an operating, there were probably many that unfolded, and I hope they did for all of you that are listening. But one of the operating principles is to find a way to regularly check in with myself and those that I lead about how you see my work as a leader. Am I meeting your needs? So you just articulated elegantly two significant pieces. This is what I stand for. I believe in these things. I believe in self-reference. I believe in quality relationships. I believe in information with understanding. And I believe this is a strategy I need to employ. That's very simple statement about what I value as a leader. The second piece was a couple of operating principles, checking in with self first, because who do we lead first? Self. How am I doing? Do I know how I fit in? How am I doing with my relationships with those that are, I report to and my peers? And how am I doing developing for myself and a deep understanding about what it is the enterprise, the system, the group is trying to accomplish? So I check on myself, and I also constantly query those that are with me on this journey. how am I doing in support of you? It is one of the ways, I think, to almost operationalize the idea, although esoteric, of a servant leader. I can't know if I'm in service if I don't understand how my work is landing on you, if I don't understand how my work is causing you to behave or not behave. So as we close this session out, as you know, what we were interested in is what do we stand for as leaders? It's up to you to kind of decide that for yourself. And what are some of your operating principles? And I think Deb and Colleen beautifully put a ribbon on this particular piece. And as we've ended every session, I'd like to end it with gratefulness. Gratefulness that you came on board to listen to us chat a little bit about what we think about leadership in the 21st century and what JLC kind of stands for. I believe you have already unfolded what we really care about and what JLC stands for, what the three of us really care about and stand for. And you've heard our operating principles unfold about all kinds of things. The three responsibilities for a leader, what this really means to us when we think about organizational health, how we believe in educing, pulling greatness out, drawing greatness out, inviting people to aspire rather than feel fearful about motivation. There are truckloads of little edges that I think unfolded through our conversations that I hope were useful to you. And in closing, I want to remind everyone, especially myself, that a JLC facilitator intends not to advocate but inquire, not to argue but to explore, not to convince but discover, and not to present but to ask questions. I hope we followed that little theme throughout this particular web series, and I hope you enjoyed your writing time and got a great deal out of it. We are very, very grateful again that you spent time with us and chose to sharpen your own leadership capacity by working with JLC. Thank you so much.